piece that involved it. Okay. I think what I would probably do is, okay, so this is the version. Okay. So one thing I'll try to do is, if nothing has to, until it comes up.
C-section and T-section. They're basically ABA forms. You know, it's turn off.
Yeah, if you mentioned, sorry. Yeah, that's a little
Actually, Jane had been. Yeah, Jane. I would suggest
It's just water.
That's what I
The window behind you open up.
I've never opened that.
all this paper.
Yes, I don't want to disturb your stuff,
You
right?
know, well, I didn't want to grab her and be like, what is this? Oh.
And Casey uses her thing, so she doesn't need them. Good luck.
from a ballet that was close to Barbara's heart. Grace and peace be with you all, and welcome to the Norwich Congregational Church as we gather to celebrate the life of Barbara Jean Duncan. I want to offer a welcome not just to family and friends who are local, but to, I know there are many who traveled far to be here, and we welcome you and rejoice in your presence as we share this time together. For those of you who are unfamiliar with this building, restrooms are located through that door and down the hallway and to the right. At the end of that hall is our parish hall, larger social space where the family invites you to join them after the service, where there are many, many cookies that need some attention and some wonderful photos as well. So please plan to join together for that after the service. Also, if you came in this door as opposed to the front where the guest book is located, please make sure you sign that. I know the family would love to have a memory of who was here to join in this time together. Barbara was a decades-long church member here. I only knew her for a year and a half, but the first time I visited with her and Gary, I knew immediately something about her character and the way that she lived her life, something that reflects the Emerson quote on the front of the bulletin. She said to me, when I thought I was there to care for her, "How can I help you? What can I do to be helpful to you and your ministry?" Her love for this church ran deep. Her love for this world ran deep. Today we give thanks to God for a beautiful soul who lived a generous and joy-filled life, a dancer and teacher and choreographer, a gardener and hiker and all-around adventurer, a passionate steward of the earth, a faithful friend, a wife and mother and sister, a child of God, a woman who made the love of God visible and tangible in the way that she lived. So today, as we give thanks, we are not alone. The light of divine grace surrounds us so that even in our sorrow, we may find peace. Even in our brokenness, that we might hear a song of joy rising up from the depths of our hearts and in the spaces between us as we share our memories of Barbara. Today is her birthday. She would have been 75 years old. And 39 years ago, almost to the day, Barbara and Gary were married here in this sanctuary. They were blessed for their life together by the same scripture that we hear today, much of the same music that we hear and sing today, and bound together by the same divine love that is being poured into our hearts today, making us one with each other and with those we love but see no more. So thanks be to God, and let us sing together for the beauty of the earth. I invite Deborah to come and share her remembrances.
Thank you, Reverend House. I remember when you came to the church because my sister was so excited to have you here. And I also want to thank friends and family for coming to celebrate in my sister's life. Hello, St. Peter. I'm Barbara Duncan. I climb mountains. I'm a ballet dancer, and I am strong and have big muscles. How can I help you up here? I didn't know what you were going to say. Many of you who knew my sister Barb have probably seen her big muscles. She was not shy about flexing them. She was not shy about most things. At a moment's notice, she might break out in song or dance. A few years ago, we were visiting a local garden center. They had a beautiful pond with swans swimming. To the surprise of the swans and other visitors, but not to me, she began performing Swan Lake Ballet. And again, I didn't know this was going to be in the program. Leaping and bounding around the pond's grassy shore, she has always been this way. Barb was my first roommate. We shared a bedroom for 8 years. She talked me to sleep most nights, despite my best efforts to listen and stay awake. Lights were out. We had said goodnight, but she just kept on talking. Even at Girl Scout camp, after taps and fires were out, she would find her way to my tent and fill me in on her day's events. In the 72 years, 8 months, and 16 days I have known her, she has never changed. That's why I will miss her. She loved the simple life. She loved the outdoors. She never complained. She never gave up. And she never compromised. I'm sure she's in heaven now, helping St. Peter pull up the milfoil.
Oh boy. Okay. I also want to thank Jonathan. Thank you so much. I want to thank Kathy and Joshua for taking on Swan Lake. Where are you? You did wonderfully with it. Thank you. I forced that on him. And thank you all for coming today. Especially today, I'm Thea, by the way. I'm her daughter. I feel a bit like how I imagine the child of a celebrity would. It would be hard to live in the Upper Valley without having heard of Barbara Duncan. Those who knew her when she first moved to the area called her Barb or Barbie, or in the case of some of the older generation of Vermonters, Barbara. She would always get stopped wherever we were, be it in the middle of a grocery store, the top of a mountain, by someone who knew her. But they wouldn't just stop her. She was like a magnet. People would come out of their houses to say hello or pull over in their cars, usually to share some memory or some connection they had to her, or just to say, I was thinking about you the other day, or to talk about some environmental news or initiative. No matter how long it had been since they had seen her, everyone was always overjoyed by her presence. And I always wondered at the effortless, innate charisma that she had, which simply put, made you want to be around her. And as much as this community loved Barbara, she loved it back. Her love affair with the Upper Valley seemed to begin the moment she set foot here. It was as if she knew this was her home, where she belonged. I think we can all agree she lived well, but how did she do that? I've had a lot of friends ask me what her secret was, how she wrung so much out of life and managed to be a remarkable mother to boot. Here's the most succinct answer I could think of. She was unapologetically herself. She lived authentically. She knew what made her happy, and she pursued her own happiness. She walked the walk. Even as she taught simplicity, she practiced it. She was content with where she was and with what she had. She sought freedom in nature and physical exercise. She valued expression through every medium of art, and most importantly, she paid attention. She knew how precious her time was, and she used it to water the relationships and communities that mattered to her. She was an excellent gardener of plants and people. When I was a teenager, I was stereotypically embarrassed by my mother. I felt she was too enthusiastic, too friendly, too goofy. And of course, once the hormones subsided, I was able to see what these qualities for what they were, which was her greatest strength. My mom's sense of humor was unique, what we call the Duncan brand. It's a rare dialect that combines extremely dry one-liners with overstated observations and a Rolodex of goofy facial expressions. She never missed an opportunity to pretend that she was an animal, or use an object in her vicinity as a comic prop, and regularly made up absurd, nonsensical song lyrics out of the blue. She was mischievous and wild and always up for an adventure, especially outdoors. This probably goes without saying, but my mother was also stunningly beautiful. Legend has it that on the day of their first date, my dad was stuck in a partners meeting at his firm, and out of the blue, he stood up and blurted out, "I have to go, I have a date with the most beautiful woman in the world," as he ran out the door. I imagine he was bewitched, as many were, by her long braids, button nose, and dancer's physique. There's also local folklore about a woman who built a log cabin topless one summer down on Stoll Road, and how the traffic on that dirt road increased exponentially that season. That being said, Barbara had almost no discernible vanity. She simply did not have time for it. In 74 years, the only time she ever wore makeup was on the stage. She rarely wore a bra, she never shaved her legs, and never washed her face with anything but water. She took hot, hot baths and owned the same purple hairbrush my entire life. Speaking of purple, my mother had a few obsessions. The color purple was one of them. Maps were another. She loved a good map, especially as if it was of a hike. Milfoil, absolutely obsessed. And I suppose I was another of her obsessions. Mainly that I wouldn't die in some horrific way. I don't know if this is an only child thing, but she would literally tell me every time we got off the phone to look both ways crossing the street, or ask if I was wearing my bike helmet. She would read in the Valley News about a fire or a drowning and recount it for me as if to warn me of meeting the same fate. She'd read about a car colliding with a moose and warn me to watch out for moose on the roads of New York City. My mother was an extremely cautious driver herself. As a family friend noted recently, if you were behind Barbara, you were going to be late. She was mainly terrified of cars, being in them and near them. Driving lessons with her were nothing short of a nightmare. She would scream and pump the imaginary brake on the passenger's side, white-knuckling the door handle. It's amazing I am able to drive at all. I could spend more time on her character defects, but for example, her excessive thriftiness, being terrible at word games, or having, as she put it, a flat learning curve with technology. But the truth is that I loved all of these things about her too. She would save the last spoonful of a meal in the fridge rather than throw it out. She wore clothing until it didn't look like clothing anymore. When it was her turn at Scrabble, she would place a random assortment of tiles on the board and pronounce them confidently as if they were a word, which amused all of us. And it secretly made sense to me that she never understood what a cell phone was, because who really does? She was an analog lady through and through. I would be remiss not to acknowledge that so much of our lives as a family have been defined by our pets. Mom tended to take on the personalities of each. I won't go into the cats. There have been too many. Cats outdoors do not last very long in the backwoods. Our first dog, Ozzy, who was actually Rachel and Coleman's dog first, was calm, easygoing, friendly, and low maintenance. Those were my elementary school years, which I think were some of the happiest of my mother's life. She and Ozzy and I would go everywhere. On Winnie the Pooh-style expeditions, down to the pond to hunt salamanders and tadpoles, off to pick raspberries or wildflowers or fiddlehead ferns, or to go sledding in the winter. Every New Year's Day, back when winter reliably provided blizzards and snow was always knee-high, we would shovel the snow off the pond and play ice hockey with a thermos of hot chocolate nearby. We'd tromp inside, happy and freezing, and hang our socks on the wood stove to dry. But I digress. Pets. During my more hectic high school years, we got Sadie, our Beagle Blue Tick Hound mix, and it was then Mom finally met her match. Sadie was untrainable, utterly wild, totally loving, loud as a hound can be. She bolted at every chance she got after a car or a deer. Every time anyone came to the house, she split the walls with her welcoming howls and jumped all over them with excitement and kisses. I think Dad has more stories for Sadie for you. But suffice it to say, she drove my mother nuts. And I suspect it was because they were so alike. It was with that same exuberance and enthusiasm my mother approached every hike, every bike ride, every cross-country ski outing, every time she went for a swim or a sail on the lake. Her relationship to nature was holy. It was where she found peace. She didn't need to travel to feel free. She just needed to be outside. I wish I could say that I accepted every hiking invitation. She used to coax me up Moosilauke and Lafayette with handfuls of M&Ms. And while I grew to enjoy it, her passion was undeniable. Someone recently told me that my mother's love for me was mountainous, which felt like the highest compliment, pun intended. That attention I spoke of earlier, she seemed to have limitless supply. And I think that's because over 40 years, every ounce of effort she gave as a citizen to enhance this community came back to her tenfold in the friendships and relationships that she built. I'm constantly astounded by how civic-minded my parents are. Although they were never the type to teach me values with their words, they have shown me by example what can happen when you invest in people and places over time. She also gave that attention to me. I can't express the gratitude I feel for the fullness and strength and purity of her love and the sheer amount of time she invested in me. She had an unwavering belief that I was meant to shine on stage and screen. And she was heartbroken with me for every audition that I didn't book. She loved theater because I loved it. And she never missed a chance to tell me how good I was and how much I deserved success. May every child with a love of acting have as supportive parents as mine, truly. They came to every show I ever did, all over the country, except for one in Dayton, Ohio, because who can blame them? I think Mom instinctively understood the power, I'm almost done, of being witnessed. And so every day in summer, she watched me dive off the dock for hours and rated my pikes, twists, and swan dives. And in winter, at the pond, she watched me try out my new skating moves. My mother never tired of watching me practice my pirouettes and développés, although she couldn't help telling me to relax my shoulders and drop my hip. She helped me learn my lines for every role I've ever played. And she begged me to sing and play piano for her when I was home, so she could simply sit and listen. It brought her so much joy. We shared our love of the arts in big ways and small, from constantly humming and harmonizing to dancing on each other's feet, to making our way through the 20th Century Pulitzer Prize winners list together, cozied up on the couch. When we weren't in an Opera North production, we'd go watch them or visit the sculpture gardens at St. Gaudens or go to Montshire. Visits to the Hood Museum, even as she declined, were still meaningful, as was listening to Stephen Sondheim, Gershwin, or the Beatles. My uncle just told me that when they were growing up, the three of them used to march around the house singing Rodgers and Hammerstein, so those melodies stayed with her right to the end. When I was a child, I was fascinated by reincarnation. I drew a picture of my mom and I wrote next to it, "Hello, I'm Barbara Duncan." And I asked her to hold on to it so that when she died, she could come back into the world and reincarnated, she'd have something to show her new family to let them know where she came from. I don't know what happened to that picture, but I like to think Barbara popping out from some new womb into the bright light of a different world and saying to her new family in her perennially cheerful tone, "Hello, I'm Barbara Duncan," would be possible, which totally defeats the purpose of reincarnation, I'm aware. More likely, she is romping happily around in some heavenly version of her log cabin with the goats in the garden and the pond, and plenty of fun construction projects and dance classes to teach. My mom lived in her own little heaven on earth, so it's hard to imagine an upgrade. But I like to think that she's staying busy and still watching all of us whenever she gets lonely. The same way that I can still connect to her when I feel sad or alone. So that's my mother. Wild, free, curious, kind, ebullient, untrainable, attentive, and loved. Thank you.
So you will soon see why today's scripture lesson has been a favorite of both Barbara's and Gary's. They did ask Gary's mother, Marie Brooks, to read this at their wedding on another beautiful summer day 39 years ago. And how fitting it is that we read this passage with hope on this beautiful summer day. It's Isaiah 65, 17 to 25. May we hear God's word to us in these words. For I am about to create new heavens and a new earth. The former things shall not be remembered or come to mind, but be glad and rejoice forever in what I am creating. For I am about to create Jerusalem as a joy and its people as a delight. I will rejoice in Jerusalem and delight in my people. No more shall the sound of weeping be heard in it, or the cry of distress. No more shall there be in it an infant who lives but a few days, or an old person who does not live out a lifetime. For one who dies at 100 years will be considered a youth, and one who falls short of 100 years will be considered accursed. They shall build houses and inhabit them. They shall plant vineyards and eat their fruit. They shall not build and another inhabit. They shall not plant and another eat. For like the days of a tree shall the days of my people be, and my chosen shall long enjoy the work of their hands. They shall not labor in vain or bear children for calamity, for they shall be offspring blessed by the Lord and their descendants as well. Before they call, I will answer. While they are yet speaking, I will hear. The wolf and the lamb shall feed together. The lion shall eat straw like the ox, but the serpent its food shall be dust. They shall not hurt or destroy on all my holy mountain, says the Lord. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
I too want to thank everyone for coming. It's a very special day. And I want to thank the volunteers of the choir who've done such a wonderful job. I think there's a pool out there among my fraternity brothers and close friends as to, at what point in this I'm going to actually break down. And I'm determined to screw up their calculations. So, bear with me and we'll see how we can get through with this. So Barbara, my Rosie, the love of my life. For some reason, I always think of Barbara in absolute terms. Terms like absolutely, and never, and always. For instance, she absolutely belonged in a different century. Not the 21st, not the 20th. She was a modern-day Thoreau, wanting to live simply, be close to nature, and do everything manually or with ancient tools. In fact, her favorite tool was something called a come-along. And for those of you who are not native Vermonters, you might ask somebody at the reception what a come-along is. Barbara never met an electronic device that she liked. She never ever bought new clothes. She never wore a bra or used makeup except on stage. The unusual dichotomies of her existence, gorgeous and graceful dancer on the one hand, and homesteader building her own cabin in the woods, chopping and stacking her own firewood, and changing the oil in her truck herself on the other, were the hallmark of her life. In a Valley News article about her that was printed in the late 1970s, she was quoted as saying, "If I'm at a party with my neighbors, we might talk about ballet for a time, but then switch to hog butchering, and that would be okay." As my daughter noted, she never did anything fast, and indeed our dear neighbor Paul Gerke was the one who said whenever I got behind her in my car, I knew I was going to be late. She never did anything fast except dance when the music required it. Barbara had an absolute sense of herself and a very strong moral code. She absolutely never lied, and she was almost always cheerful. In all the medical challenges that she faced in the last years of her life, she always exhibited her lifelong good and kind nature and was never bitter or angry. She absolutely loved winter, cross-country skiing and snowshoeing particularly, and true to her contrarian nature, she loved shoveling snow. So much so that sometimes our neighbors would wake up to find their driveways shoveled by her because, why not? She was out there anyway. I now pay a man with a big truck and many fancy attachments a lot of money to do what Barbara routinely did with a simple snow shovel. Also in the always column, in addition to winter sports, Barbara always loved hiking and swimming, and she always loved the animals in her life. Sometimes she mixed the two in odd ways. Many of you know that when Barbara first moved to the Upper Valley, she raised goats. One day she decided to climb one of the peaks in the White Mountains and for some reason thought that the goats would like to accompany her. She loaded 3 of them in her truck, drove to the trailhead, and parking the truck there, she chose a trail that would eventually come out several miles from her point of origin. She and the goats climbed the mountain and then made their descent. And when they reached the road, she stuck out her thumb to hitchhike with the goats back to where her truck was parked. While this did not apparently seem unusual to her, it certainly struck the hundreds of cars that passed her by as being a little weird. Finally, after a considerable time, a kind man with his own truck stopped and offered her a lift. He told her he felt he had to stop because he was sure no one else would. Similarly with swimming, as I said, Barbara loved to swim, and particularly to swim in Lake Maury, where we had a home for many years. She also loved our dog, Sadie. Sadie wanted to be with Barbara all the time, but she did not like the water. So Barbara would put Sadie in the canoe, tie the canoe to her bathing suit, and swim across Lake Maury, pulling the canoe with Sadie in the prow, happily barking. Until we got to know our wonderful neighbors at the lake better, Barbara was frequently referred to as that crazy woman who pulls the dog in the boat. Barbara abhorred violence in any form. When our aforementioned dog Sadie was young, she had a bad habit of chasing cars down our rural road. Barbara consulted our wise friend and neighbor, Phil Phillips, and he advised her to get a gun, load it with blanks, and then drive her truck past our house. Then when Sadie started to chase the truck, Phil said, just shoot a few blanks out the window at her, and it'll scare her out of the habit. Well, Barbara, of course, was never going to get a gun. So instead, she went to Dan & Witt's and bought a cat pistol. She had me hold Sadie in the yard while she drove her truck up the road and then turned around to make her pass by the house. When the truck was near, I let Sadie go, and she predictably started her chase. As Sadie got close to the truck, Barbara tried to shoot the cap pistol out the window at her. Unfortunately, she had misloaded the caps, and there was no firing and no sound, so she just tossed the cap pistol on the seat and leaned out the window and yelled, "Bang, bang, bang," at our confused dog. I don't know whether she might have had a bad experience with fire at some early point in her life, but Barbara was always convinced that any object, up to and including a glass of water, was capable of spontaneous combustion. The things that she warned us against leaving unattended or undoused were legion, and as I said, frequently illogical. Another somewhat endearing but also annoying quirk of Barbara's was her uncanny ability to think of incredibly stupid things I might do, things that neither I nor any sane person would ever do, and then warn me urgently not to do them. For example, and combining both of these quirks, Barbara might say, "Panda," she always called me Panda, "don't walk across the living room with your eyes shut because you might trip over the coffee table and fall into the fireplace and knock an ember from last winter out of the ash can and burn down the house." We will pause here to ponder how an ember from last winter might still be burning in the ash can, or more to the point, why I might be walking across the living room with my eyes closed, but you get the point. While she accomplished extraordinary things in her careers as a ballet dancer, teacher, and choreographer, and as the executive director of an environmental organization, I think Barbara would prefer that her legacy be more simple. She always lived an honest, purpose-driven life, and she absolutely loved her family and friends. Toni Morrison, one of Barbara's favorite authors, has written that something that is loved is never lost. I take comfort from this, as well as from the Bible, in Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, in which he assures us love does not die. So, Barbara, my Rosie, the love of my life, she taught me to breathe, to move, to live, to love, to dance. And so for me and for all of us, death has had no victory over Barbara. She will absolutely dance on forever in our hearts.
As we commend Barbara into God's eternal care, let us go in the joy of the resurrection, in the love of God and neighbor, and in the peace of Christ. May God bless you and keep you. May God's face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May God look upon you with kindness and give you peace, now and forevermore. Amen.